Admiral Catherine Wells stood in the observation window of the Meridian 7 station and looked out at the stars. Behind her, the council chamber buzzed with voices from 8 different species. She could hear them talking about humanity. She could hear them dismissing humanity. She did not turn around. The Galactic Council had been meeting for 3 hours. Catherine had watched the vote come. It was not even close. 8 votes against humanity's request for full membership. 1 vote in favor. The only species to support. Humanity was the Vrel, the ancient aquatic race that lived in the deep oceans of their homeworld. No one knew why they had voted yes. The Vrel did not explain themselves. They never did. Catherine felt something cold move through her chest. It was not anger exactly. It was something deeper. It was the feeling that comes when a person realizes the world sees them as less than what they are. She had brought humanity's greatest achievements to this council. She had shown them the records of human exploration, human science, human art. She had shown them the colonies on 12 worlds. She had shown them the ships that had traveled farther than any human ship should have gone. And they had said no. The council chamber doors opened and Prime Minister Victor Hayes walked out. He was an older man with gray hair and a tired face. He had spent the last 30 years building bridges between Earth and the other species of the galaxy. He had worked so hard for this moment. He looked at Catherine and shook his head. "They will not hear us," Victor said. His voice was steady, but Catherine could see his hands shaking slightly. Krell spoke last. He said, "We are too young, too aggressive, too unpredictable." He said, "We are too dangerous to trust with real power in the council." Catherine finally turned from the window. What did the Vrel say about their vote? Nothing. The ambassador just recorded the vote and said nothing else. I asked directly. The Vrel do not answer to questions about their decisions. Catherine nodded. She had expected that. The Vrel were old and strange. They had been space traveling when humanity was still figuring out how to make fire burn without smoke. Victor sat down on a bench. He looked very tired. "I failed," he said. "I had one job, to get humanity a seat at this table, and I failed." "You did everything you could," Catherine said. She meant it. Victor had done more for humanity than anyone else alive. "It was not enough," Victor said. The two of them sat in silence for a moment. Then Catherine heard footsteps. Krell himself was walking toward them. The reptilian alien moved with slow, powerful steps. His scales were bright green and blue, and his eyes were like yellow fire. He was nearly 3 meters tall, and he moved like a predator that knew nothing could hurt him. "Prime Minister Hayes," Krell said. His voice was like gravel being crushed. "Admiral Wells, I wanted to speak with you before you left the station." "We have nothing to say to you," Catherine said. She spoke quietly, but every word was hard and clean. Krell made a sound that might have been a laugh. "I would say otherwise. You came here asking for a place in the Council of Galactic Powers. You came here asking for us to treat you as equals. And you asked with ships that break down, with weapons that are toys compared to ours, with a species that barely knows how to walk among the stars. Do you understand how this looked to us? We understand that you do not respect us," Catherine said. "Respect?" Krell moved closer. "It is not about respect. It is about capability. You are children. You may grow into something important one day. But today, you are just children playing with tools you do not understand. In 500 years, perhaps, humanity will be ready to sit with the great powers. But today is not that day." Catherine's jaw tightened. She wanted to say something hard and angry, but she knew that would only prove Krell right. Instead, she said, "We will prove ourselves in other ways. Perhaps," Krell said, "or perhaps you will take your place as a younger species and accept what the galaxy has decided for you. That would be the wise choice, the safe choice. Krell turned and walked away. His tail dragged behind him, and Catherine noticed that he moved without any real fear. He moved like something that knew the universe was built to protect it. That was when Catherine understood something important. Krell did not hate humanity. He did not think humans were evil or bad. He simply did not think humans mattered. To Krell, humanity was not a threat. Humanity was not important enough to be a threat. Humanity was something that could be ignored. Catherine felt something change inside her. That cold thing in her chest grew sharper. It became something like purpose. Victor saw the change happen. Catherine, what are you thinking? I am thinking that we will make them see us, Catherine said. Not by asking, not by being nice. We will make them see us by being impossible to ignore. That is a dangerous thought, Victor said. Yes, Catherine agreed. It is. They watched Krell walk back into the council chamber with the other alien representatives. The doors closed behind him. Catherine turned back to the window and looked out at the stars again. Somewhere out there, human ships were traveling. Somewhere out there, human colonies were growing. Somewhere out there, humans were working and building and fighting to survive. The galaxy had decided that humanity did not matter. Catherine Wells had just decided that the galaxy was wrong. She did not know how to prove it yet, but she knew that she would find a way. She knew that the galaxy would learn to see humanity not as children, but as something far more dangerous. Something dangerous enough to matter. The stars looked down on the station with their old light. They had seen many empires rise and fall. They had seen great powers become nothing. The stars did not care about the decisions of the Galactic Council, but Catherine Wells cared, and she would make sure the galaxy cared too. In the council chamber, Krell spoke to another representative. The humans showed anger, he said. That is a sign of weakness. If they had simply accepted our decision, they might have been wise. But they will not accept it. That means they will do something foolish, and foolish species do not last long in this galaxy. But in the observation window, Catherine Wells was already thinking 3 steps ahead. The first step was to survive. The second step was to prove Krell wrong. And the third step was something she could not yet see. But she knew it was coming. Catherine Wells was a human. And humans, if nothing else, knew how to fight. The message came without warning. 3 days after Catherine Wells left the Meridian 7 station, the Krell warships appeared above Kepler 442b. They did not announce themselves. They did not request a channel for communication. They simply came out of the dark and made their presence known by firing on the human defense platforms. Colonel David Hampton was in the command center when the alarm started. He'd been reviewing supply reports for the colony. It was boring work, the kind of work that most military officers did not think about. But David thought about it. He thought about food supplies, medical equipment, ammunition, water, energy. He thought about everything a colony needed to survive. When the alarm started, David stopped thinking about supplies. We have multiple contacts, the sensor officer reported. Her name was Lieutenant Emma Burns, and her voice was steady, even though her hands were moving fast across her console. 8 Krell warships. They are in high orbit. Weapons are active. David moved to the main tactical display. The ships were massive. Each one was at least 5 kilometers long. The human defense platforms looked like insects next to them. The platforms had good weapons. They had been built by the best human engineers. But they were not enough. They were never going to be enough against something that size. Get me Dr. Sarah Miles, David said. Priority channel. 2 seconds later, the administrator of the colony appeared on the display. Sarah Miles was a scientist, not a soldier. She had spent her life studying how to make colonies work on hostile worlds. She had the mind of someone who understood systems and problems and solutions. Right now, she looked like someone who had just realized the biggest problem of her life had arrived. "The Krell are here," David said. It was not a question. "Yes," Sarah said. "Why?" "That is a good question with no good answer," David said. "We have maybe 10 minutes before they demand our surrender. So we need to start moving. Get the evacuation protocols ready. I want everyone who is not military moving toward the shuttles." "All of them?" Sarah asked. The colony had about 4,000 civilians. "All of them," David confirmed. "We are not going to win this, but we can make sure the Krell pays a price for taking this colony." Sarah closed her connection. David could hear orders being given in the background. The machinery of evacuation was starting. It was something they had planned for, but had never really believed would happen. The Krell message came through 5 minutes later. The voice was harsh and metallic. "Human colony, you are surrounded. You will surrender all military equipment, all technology, and place yourselves under Krell authority. You have 1 hour to comply. If you refuse, we will destroy your colony and any humans who resist." David smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who had just learned the rules of the game and had decided to break them. "Send this message," David said. "This is Colonel David Hampton of the human military. We do not surrender. We do not accept your authority, and we are going to make you regret coming here." The sensor officer looked at him like he was crazy. Maybe he was. But David knew something that the Krell did not understand. The Krell were big and strong and advanced, but they had never fought humans before. Humans did not fight by the rules that the Krell understood. Humans fought with things like creativity and desperation and anger. The Krell landing shuttles came down 20 minutes later. They came in formation, confident and controlled. David had already set everything in motion. The human soldiers had moved to prepared positions in the colony. They knew the terrain. They knew where the Krell would come. And they had prepared a welcome. The first shuttle landed in a cloud of dust. Krell soldiers emerged. They were heavily armored, moving with perfect military precision. They looked like nothing could stop them. Then Major Lisa Hunt triggered the first charge. The ground beneath the Krell soldiers exploded. It was not a big explosion by Krell standards, but it did not need to be. 10 soldiers fell. Another 15 were wounded. The Krell formation broke for just 1 second. That second was enough. The human soldiers opened fire from hidden positions. The Krell soldiers scattered, returning fire with weapons that burned so hot they made the air ripple. But they were confused. They had expected to land, advance, and crush any resistance. They had not expected to be attacked immediately. They had not expected the humans to know where they would land. The battle went on for hours. The Krell kept landing more soldiers, more equipment, more weapons. The humans kept falling back, losing ground, but making the Krell pay for every meter. Lisa Hunt led her team through destroyed buildings, using the colony itself as a weapon. They hit Krell supply lines. They attacked communication stations. They made the occupation cost more with every minute that passed. Sarah Miles was in the main shuttle bay, watching the evacuation. 2,000 civilians had already left. Another 1,000 were boarding. The last shuttle was preparing for departure. She wanted to stay. She wanted to help David fight. But David had given her an order. She was to leave with the last shuttle, to make sure the civilian government was preserved. Somewhere safe. David was in the command center with about 200 soldiers. The Krell had taken most of the colony. The humans were now holding just the military complex. The walls were damaged. The systems were failing. And still, they fought. At midnight, 6 hours into the battle, David gave the order to retreat. The last humans fell back toward the launch bay. David made sure every soldier made it to the shuttles. He was the last human to leave the facility. He was the last human to see Kepler 442b from the inside. The shuttle rose into the sky. Behind them, the Krull warships filled the space above the colony. Behind them, the colony was burning. Hundreds of humans had died. Thousands more had escaped. The colony was lost, but as David looked down at the planet below, he felt something that the Krull would never understand. He felt rage. He felt determination. He felt the hard knowledge that this was not finished. This was the beginning. The humans would remember Kepler 442b, and they would make the Krull remember it too. In his command center on the largest Krull warship. Supreme Commander Velther watched the human shuttles escape. He was pleased. The human colony had fallen. The humans had fought harder than expected, and that was interesting. But they had fallen anyway. That was what mattered. The Krull had superior numbers, superior technology, and superior organization. There was only one possible outcome in any conflict between Krull and humans. The Krull would win. Velther did not know that he was wrong. He would learn that lesson soon enough. But learning it would cost him everything. The human shuttles jumped to faster than light speed and disappeared from Krull sensors. They carried with them the refugees of Kepler 442b. They carried with them grief and rage and the hard knowledge that humanity was now at war. And in that war, humanity would learn to be something new. Something the Krull had never seen before. Something that made their weapons and their size and their history mean nothing at all. Catherine Wells stood in the observation room of Olympus Station and looked at the list of species that had refused her request for a military alliance. The list was long. The Zixner said they were peaceful and would not get involved in human conflicts. The Relian Collective said humans were too unpredictable. The Varith Empire said humanity brought bad luck. They all had reasons. The real reason was simple. They did not think humanity was worth the risk. 1 week had passed since the fall of Kepler 442b. 2 weeks since the Galactic Council had rejected humanity. The universe was not moving slowly. It was moving toward a conclusion. And humanity was running out of time. Catherine had been sending messages to every species that would listen to her. Most would not. Some took her calls, but said nothing useful. A few actually laughed at her. The ambassador of the Quaranathi species had actually laughed when Catherine suggested a military alliance. You want us to ally with a species that just lost a colony to the Krull? The ambassador had said, that is not an alliance. That is a death sentence. The view screen showed a message incoming. It was from the Vrel. Catherine's heart jumped. The Vrel had voted for humanity at the council. There was something there. There was something the Vrel understood that no other species understood. The message was simple. The Vrel ambassador wanted to meet with Catherine. Alone. The Vrel ship arrived 2 hours later. It was nothing like human ships. It was organic in shape, looking more like a creature than a machine. The ambassador emerged from a transport with several assistants. The Vrel were tall and slender, with skin that seemed to shift color in the light. Their eyes were large and dark, like they could see things that other eyes could not see. The ambassador's name was Mern Dax. Catherine had never spoken with her before, but she had a feeling that Mern Dax had been watching her for a long time. They sat in a private conference room. Mern Dax drank something that looked like water, but probably was not. Catherine waited. She had learned that silence could be a weapon. Sometimes it was better to let other people fill the empty space. You wonder why we voted for you, Mern Dax said finally. You wonder why we are here now. I do, Catherine said. The council said you gave no reason. We do not owe reasons to species that do not understand what they are asking for, Mern Dax said. But you are different. You are desperate. And desperate species sometimes become brilliant. So we will give you our reason. Mern Dax touched the device, and images appeared on the display between them. The images were old. Very old. They were star charts and data that Catherine did not understand. 2,000 years ago, Merendak said, the Vrel discovered something in the oldest parts of our archives. A prophecy. Not from us. From a species that existed before we did. Before the Krell did. Before any of the current powers of the galaxy existed. A prophecy? Catherine asked. She did not believe in prophecies. She was a soldier and a scientist. Prophecies were for believers, not for her. Yes, Merendak said. The prophecy spoke of a young species. A species born on a world of danger and hardship. A species that would either save the galaxy or destroy it. For 2,000 years, we waited. We watched young species rise and fall. None of them fit the prophecy. Until you appeared. Catherine listened without speaking. This was strange, and strange things usually contain dangerous truth. The Krell are old and strong, Merendak continued. But they are also rigid. They cannot change. They can only become more of what they already are. The prophecy said the young species would either save the galaxy by becoming something the old powers could never be, or destroy it by forcing a war that would kill everyone. There is no middle path. There is only victory or annihilation. And you believe humans are this species? Catherine asked. We know you are, Merendak said. We have watched you. You are harder than you should be. You are faster to adapt than anything else in this galaxy. You feel pain more deeply, and you fight harder because of it. You are the species the prophecy predicted. Catherine felt something settle in her. This was too much weight to carry. But she carried it anyway, because what else could she do? What do you want from me? Catherine asked. We want you to survive, Merendak said. We want you to gather the other species that the Krell has damaged. We want you to build an alliance and fight the Krell. And we want you to win. That is impossible, Catherine said. The Krell have superior technology, superior numbers, superior organization. Yes, Merendak said. But they do not have what you have. They do not have people who are willing to die for something beyond themselves. They do not have the creativity that comes from desperation. They do not have the ability to see a problem and solve it in a way that would never occur to them. This is why the prophecy chose your species. Not because you are strong, but because you are flexible. Because you break and you bend and you survive. Catherine stood and looked at the images from the Vrel archives. The prophecy was written in a language she did not know. But the meaning was clear. The Vrel believed that humanity was special. The Vrel believed that humanity could change the galaxy. The Vrel believed that the Krell's time was ending. If I do this, Catherine said, if I go to the other species and ask them to join us, and if they refuse, what happens then? Then the Krell will kill humanity, and the cycle will continue, Merendak said. The prophecy will find another young species in another 1,000 years. But we do not believe you will fail. We believe you will succeed because we have seen what you are capable of. We have seen humans fight. We have seen humans refuse to surrender even when victory is impossible. That is your strength. That is why you will win. Catherine nodded. She did not fully believe it yet, but she believed enough. She believed enough to try. Over the next month, Catherine traveled to 8 different species. She told them what had happened to Kepler-4, 42b. She told them about the Krell's expansion. She told them about her vision of a united galaxy that was not under Krell control. Some species still refused, but others listened. The Zorvith had lost a territory to Krell expansion. The Nilfir had lost trade routes. The Rill had lost their home system, driven to live on colony worlds that were never quite safe. Slowly, an alliance began to form. It was fragile and strange, made of species that had never fought together before. But it was real, and it was growing. Colonel David Hampton was brought in to plan the military strategy. He sat with commanders from 7 different species and tried to explain how humans fought, how they used terrain and speed and unpredictability, how they were not afraid to lose people if it meant winning in the end. The other commanders looked at him like he was crazy, but something in what he said made sense to them. Something in the human way of fighting spoke to the desperation that all of them felt. The alliance was fragile, but it was enough. It had to be enough, because the alternative was extinction, and none of them were ready to become extinct. The war began in silence and ended in blood. The first attack came from human ships. They did not have the weapons of the Krell. They did not have the armor, or the size, or the power. But they had something else. They had the element of surprise. Colonel David Hampton had studied the Krell for 3 months. He had watched their movements, their patterns, their behavior, and he had found what he was looking for. The Krell were predictable. They were strong, but they were also rigid. They followed their procedures. They did their maneuvers the same way every time. They did not think like humans thought. They did not see the world the way humans saw it. The first Krell supply station was destroyed by a human attack force of only 40 soldiers. They came in fast, dropped their weapons, and vanished into the asteroid field before Krell reinforcements could arrive. The supplies that were supposed to feed 3 Krell battle groups were gone. The supplies that were supposed to maintain Krell weapons were destroyed. It was a small victory. But it was a victory. The Krell responded by sending more ships. They wanted to crush the human resistance before it could become a real threat. They still believed that more ships, more weapons, more soldiers would win the day. That was how they understood warfare. That was the only way the Krell understood anything. But David Hampton understood something different. He understood that in war, sometimes a small group of desperate people could do more damage than a big army. He understood that the Krell's strength was also their weakness. They were so big, so powerful, so organized that they could not think small. They could not imagine a way to fight that did not involve massive forces and overwhelming power. Humans could imagine that. Humans could think small and brutal and fast. Major Lisa Hunt led a team of 30 humans into a Krell battle cruiser. The cruiser was 5 kilometers long and carried a crew of 10,000 Krell soldiers. The odds were insane. The odds were impossible. Lisa did not care about the odds. She and her team infiltrated through the reactor section. They moved like ghosts through the ship, using the Krell's own technology against them. They planted charges in vital systems. When the charges went off, the entire rear section of the ship was disabled. The reactor core overloaded. The ship was crippled. Krell reinforcements arrived, and Lisa's team had to fight their way out. They lost 12 people, but they escaped with the other 18. And the Krell battlecruiser, one of the most powerful ships in Krell space, was nothing but floating wreckage. The Krell began to understand that something was wrong. For the first time in their history, they were losing. Not badly. Not yet. But they were losing soldiers and ships and supplies faster than they could replace them. The Krell did not know what to do about this. They did not know how to fight an enemy that would not stand and fight a real battle. They did not know how to fight humans. The commanders of the other species in the Alliance watched what the humans were doing and began to change their own tactics. The Zorvath, who were large and slow, began to work with human strike teams. The Nilthir, who were peaceful by nature, learned to fight with human soldiers. The Rill, who had lost so much, fought with a fury that even the humans respected. The war spread across space. It spread to 10 different systems, then 20, then 50. The Krell kept sending more forces. Their economy was strong. Their resources were vast, but they could not replace their ships as fast as they were being destroyed. They could not replace their soldiers as fast as they were falling. 6 months into the war, Supreme Commander Velthor came to a terrible realization. He was losing. The Krell were not supposed to lose. The Krell were strong and organized and advanced. But none of those things mattered against an enemy that would not play by the rules of war that the Krell understood. The humans had learned something that the Krell could not learn. They had learned that war was not about having the biggest weapon. War was about having the will to win, no matter what the cost. War was about being willing to sacrifice yourself for something bigger than yourself. The Krell did not think that way. The Krell thought about duty and order and the hierarchy. But the Krell did not think about why they were fighting. For the humans, the war was personal. It was about survival. It was about the people they had lost. It was about making sure the Krell could never take anything else from them. That made the humans dangerous in a way that the Krell had never encountered before. As the war went on, Catherine Wells and David Hampton began to plan something bigger. They began to plan the final assault. They began to plan the destruction of the Krell homeworld itself. Or not the destruction, the capture. The Krell fortress world was called Velthorax. It was the heart of the Krell Empire. Its defenses were legendary. Its weapons were the most advanced in Krell space. No enemy had ever even gotten close to Velthorax. No enemy had ever tried. David Hampton looked at the data on Velthorax for 3 days straight. He did not sleep. He did not eat very much. He just looked at the data. And slowly, he began to see the problem. The fortress was built for defense against normal attacks. It was built to repel invasion from ships. It was built to stop the kind of attack that made sense to the Krell. But what if the attack did not make sense? What if the attack was so crazy that the Krell could not even imagine it? David wrote the plan. Catherine read it and said it was insane. All the commanders of the Alliance read it and said it was suicide. But then they read it again, and they began to see what David was trying to do. They began to see that crazy was sometimes the only thing that worked. The assault force began to gather. 10,000 humans. 5,000 soldiers from the other species. 20 ships. That was all they had. The Krell had 50 ships defending Velthorax. The Krell had 50,000 soldiers on the surface. The odds were not good. But as they moved toward Velthorax, David found that he did not care about the odds anymore. He cared about winning. He cared about making sure that Kepler 442b was the last colony that the Krell took from humanity. He cared about making sure that the Krell would never again dismiss humanity as too weak to matter. The ships jumped to faster-than-light speed and began their final approach to Velthorax. In 3 days, everything would be decided. In 3 days, either humanity and the Alliance would win, or they would be destroyed. There was no middle ground. There was only victory or death. And for the first time since the war began, Catherine Wells felt something that was not fear or determination. She felt something like hope. She felt like they might actually win. The battle for Velthorax lasted 6 hours. It felt like 6 years. The human and Alliance fleet came out of faster-than-light space with their weapons already firing. It was not an elegant attack. It was not a perfect attack. It was just fast and hard and brutal. The first Krell defense ships were destroyed before they could fully understand what was happening. But the Krell had 50 ships, and they began to fight back. The human fleet was smaller and less advanced. In a long battle, the Krell would win. But this would not be a long battle. This would be fast and desperate, and decided by whoever wanted to win more. David Hampton was in the lead fighter. He had insisted on being part of the assault team. Catherine had argued with him, but in the end she had given him permission. She knew that sometimes a leader had to be willing to do what they asked other people to do. The Krell weapons were powerful, but they were slow. They needed time to aim and fire. The human ships were faster. They used that speed. They came in from angles that the Krell did not expect. They hit and moved and hit again. They did not try to win a fair fight. They just tried to win. The first phase of the battle lasted 90 minutes. When it was over, 12 human ships were destroyed. But 28 Krell ships were crippled or dead. The human fleet had broken through. They were going to get to the surface. David's shuttle descended through the Krell defense grid. The shuttle was built to take damage, but it took a lot of damage. The hull was hot from weapons fire. The interior filled with smoke. But David and his team of 40 soldiers made it to the surface. They landed in a crater near the main fortress. The fortress was massive. It rose out of the ground like a mountain made of metal and weapons. David looked at it and understood for the first time how much the Krell believed in their own strength. They had built a fortress so big and so strong that they did not think anything could ever hurt it. David had other ideas. The Krell soldiers began to pour out of the fortress immediately. They were organized and armored and powerful. But they had never fought humans before. Not like this. Not with their backs to the wall and nowhere to retreat. David's soldiers moved fast. They did not try to win a fair fight. They used every trick they had learned over months of war against the Krell. They used the terrain. They used explosives. They used the buildings of the fortress itself as weapons. They hit the Krell from sides and angles the Krell did not expect. Lisa Hunt led a team up the main fortress wall. The wall was defended by Krell soldiers with heavy weapons. The odds said the human team would be cut down before they got halfway up. But they kept moving. They kept climbing. They were willing to die for this. That made them faster and harder than the Krell soldiers who were defending their position. The first Krell soldier was killed by Lisa herself. She did not hesitate. She did not think about it. She just moved and fought and moved again. Behind her, more humans climbed the wall. The Krell soldiers fell back. They fell back because for the first time, they were fighting something that was more willing to die than they were. 4 hours into the ground battle, David received a message from his scouts. Supreme Commander Velthor was in the central command tower. The tower was in the middle of the fortress, heavily defended, surrounded by Krell elite soldiers. It was the place where Velthor would make his last stand. David gathered 12 of his best soldiers, and he began to move through the fortress toward the command tower. The Krell tried to stop him. There were thousands of Krell soldiers, and only 13 humans. The odds were terrible. But the humans had learned to fight in a way that the Krell did not understand. David's team moved like water. They went where the Krell were weakest. They attacked where the Krell were not expecting an attack. They used their knowledge of the fortress, which they had studied for months, against the Krell defenders. One by one, the Krell soldiers fell. By the time David reached the command tower, 6 of his soldiers were dead. But 6 were still alive, and they were still fighting. The command tower had a main entrance and nothing else. It was a killing ground. The Krell had designed it as a place where an invading force would be destroyed. David did not go through the entrance. He used explosives to blast through the wall. He came in from a direction that the Krell did not expect. Velthor was in the center of the room. He was the size of a small building. His armor was covered with weapons. Around him were his elite soldiers, the strongest and the fastest and the most trained of all Krell warriors. David's remaining 6 soldiers opened fire. The first elite warrior fell, then the second. But there were 10 of them, and they began to tear through David's soldiers. In 30 seconds, 4 of David's soldiers were dead. David and one other soldier, a woman named Maria, fought Velthor directly. It was insane. The Supreme Commander was stronger and faster and covered in better armor. But David and Maria did not care about fair. They just cared about winning. Maria was killed when Velthor threw her into the wall. But as Velther turned back to David, he had to step over the body of the soldier he had just killed. In that moment of stepping over, Maria's hands came up and pulled out a weapon. She fired. The weapon was weak against Krell armor, but it was enough. It distracted Velther for just 1 second. That second was enough. David moved. He did something that the Krell would never have done. He did not fight fairly. He did not try to win by being stronger. He grabbed Velther's weapon arm and held on. He did not let go. The Supreme Commander was stronger, but he was not prepared for someone who would just hold on and never let go. David pulled Velther off balance. The other Krell elite soldiers were still fighting, but there were only 2 of them now. One human soldier, a man named Paul, was still standing. Paul grabbed the nearest weapon and fired at the closest Krell soldier. Velther realized the truth. He was losing. The fortress was being taken. His soldiers were being killed. This human, this weak and small human, was defeating him. The fortress fell at dawn. The human and Alliance forces controlled every section. The Krell soldiers were captured or killed. Supreme Commander Velther was alive, and he was imprisoned in the depths of the fortress. 2 days later, Catherine Wells stood in the prison chamber with Velther. The Supreme Commander was in a restraint field. He was alive, but he was defeated. "Tell me something," Catherine said. "How does it feel? How does it feel to be beaten by creatures you thought were too weak to matter?" Velther looked at Catherine with his yellow eyes. "I made a mistake," he said. His voice was quiet. "I measured your strength by the standards I understood. I measured you by technology and armor and numbers. I did not understand that a species born on a harsh world, where death comes easily and nothing is guaranteed, would fight with a kind of desperation that we do not possess. I did not understand that humans could be more willing to die than we are to kill. That was my failure." Catherine nodded. She did not feel good about Velther's defeat. She just felt tired. She felt the weight of all the people who had died to make this victory happen. 1 month later, Catherine Wells stood in the Galactic Council chamber. The council had been reformed. The Krell no longer held the majority. Now the council was balanced. Humans, the Vrel, the Zorvath, the Nilfir, the Rill, and 4 other species all had equal votes. The council was not perfect, but it was fair. "I move that humanity be granted full council status and equal authority in all galactic matters," Catherine said. The motion passed. 7 votes for, 1 vote abstaining, and 1 vote against from a Krell representative who had survived the fall of Velthorix. Catherine walked out of the council chamber and found David Hampton waiting for her. They looked at each other without speaking for a moment. Then David said, "We did it." "Yes," Catherine said. "We did. But it cost us so much." "That is the price of becoming something important," David said. "We were never going to get here without paying." They stood together in the observation window and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, human ships were traveling to new colonies. Humans were building new lives. Humans were learning their place in the galaxy, but they would never be underestimated again. On a human ship heading back to Earth, Lisa Hunt stood with Paul and others who had survived the assault on Velthorix. Lisa was thinking about the friend she had lost. She was thinking about Maria, who had given her life in the command tower. She was thinking about all the people who had sacrificed everything so that humans could matter. What comes next? Paul asked. Lisa looked at the stars. "I do not know," she said. "But whatever comes next, it is something new. And we are ready for it." The prophecy of the Vrel had been fulfilled, but not as destruction. It had been fulfilled through victory, through the triumph of a species that should have been defeated, through humans who had learned that they were capable of more than they ever believed. Catherine Wells, in her quarters on Olympus Station, touched the memorial plaque for those who had died at Kepler 442b. She whispered a promise that they would never be forgotten. She whispered a promise that the sacrifice would mean something. And in the dark of space, the stars looked down on humanity's rise with their ancient and patient light. They had seen empires come and go, but humanity was something new. Humanity was something that refused to be anything less than what it believed it could be.